Hey, Mike here with Canadian Musician, right now in beautiful Montreal for the Montreal International Jazz Festival. And it's a real pleasure of mine to be sitting with one of the kind of headlining artists on tonight's bill, Harry Manx. Harry, how are you doing today?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me on. I love your magazine, by the way.
Oh, thank you for that. And tonight, your show tonight, you're going to be playing with the greats John Mayall and James Cotton. You're a bit of a late addition to this bill, filling in Taj Mahal had to pull out for health reasons, and you were brought in. And kind of first off, how are you feeling about filling the kind of the boots of the great Taj Mahal?
Yeah, those are big boots, man. Taj is such a great player. But I will say that I'm so happy to get to see John Mayall and James Cotton again. I first went to see John Mayall when I was 14, 1960-something, at the what was then the Hummingbird Center or the O'Keefe Center downtown. And then when I was a sound man at the El Macombo in Toronto, I mixed sound for Muddy Waters, and James Cotton was in the band.
Really?
Yeah, and I also must have been about 19 at that time. So it's great to see these guys. It's been that long since I've seen them.
Have you seen James here today? Does he know that yet?
No, he doesn't know that. He wouldn't recognize me, I'm sure. That's going back 40-odd years. No, but I was so inspired by James and Muddy when I was a sound guy as a kid. I felt like now I'm seeing what is the heart of the blues. And I didn't learn any licks from them, but I got something about the groove watching them. And I think I still carry some of that, what I learned in those days.
No kidding. And to kind of, first let's look a bit of your most recent album, 20 Strings of Truth. And
20 Strings and the Truth.
And the Truth. 20 Strings and the Truth. My apologies. But it's a bit different than a lot of your other work in the fact that it's primarily an instrumental album.
Yes.
And was that the intention when you started recording, or essentially where did that idea develop?
You know, I often take my cues from the audience. They tell me things after the show. I always go and meet the crowd after the show, and they'll tell me, I would like to have an album of yours with more Indian stuff and more just beautiful stuff I can listen to while I'm around the house. So I set out to kind of make a more instrumental album, and I realized it's not as easy as it sounds because you still have to engage your audience, your listener, with the melody. Mm-hmm. So I worked on that about a year, and I put that album out, and people seem to be very kind to me. They usually accept whatever I give, and they've received this one pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Not having the vocals there to kind of push the song forward, did that change, doing it instrumentally, did that change the way you were kind of writing and crafting the music?
Yeah, I had to really consider where's the point of focus in the song, so I have to be more conscious about a melody and always something engaging going on in the tune. And but I also wanted to just have some free space where maybe the music doesn't hold your attention so much, but you feel it. Mm-hmm. And I have some of those kind of tunes where they're in the background. It just lifts up your moment a little bit, perhaps. Yeah.
When you're listening to music, is it primarily or listening to songs, I should say, is it primarily the music or the vocals that catch you or that are your primary attention?
Yeah, that's interesting. It depends on the artist. Some artists, I just love the vocals, and I'm aware that from the audience, a lot of those people who aren't musicians, they're more attracted to vocals than anything else because it has more interest for them. Yeah. Words, and the instrumental part, unless they're really drawn to it, they might not get as much out of it. It was a challenge doing less vocals, I have to say it, but I enjoyed it nonetheless.
Interesting. Your career trajectory is very interesting in the sense you didn't release an album until the early 2000s, at which point you were 46, and since then you've wasted no time putting out music. You've been releasing albums at almost a once a year pace, which is unheard of in today's day and age in a lot of ways. Looking back at those first couple albums, because it was very late by modern standards when to just start recording, those first few albums, was it music that you had amassed over the course of your life, or was it new music even at that time?
Well, the very first record, I made at 46 when I came to Canada after being in Asia forever. I had a few songs, but I started looking for songs to record, and I started digging up blues songs. And the guy I got to produce me, he said, "Yeah, you need some more songs." So I went and wrote a few, just like right away for the. I didn't have much of a pile of songs anywhere. I didn't have any songs. I had to start creating them at that point. And up until that point in my life, I'd played with a lot of other people on recording sessions and live tours and stuff. But I never really felt I had much to say, to be honest, until that first record. And then it sold really well, and I realized, well, maybe I do have something to say. And the second one was more of a challenge because I knew people were listening. Got me scared, and I tried hard to really make a good record. That was Wise and Otherwise. To this day, a lot of people will tell me that is their favorite record, that a lot of the songs which became hits for me, in a sense, they're from that record. Yeah.
What's with now, since that first album, it's now been almost 15 years. Yeah. So you do have, I guess, the benefit of retrospect now at this point. Seeing the fact that, like you said, you'd made a living as a musician for almost your whole life, but it wasn't until that point that you're putting out your own music in a commercial way. And now with, like I said, the benefit of retrospect, do you think, was there a benefit to, in a way, both musically and career-wise, to starting your commercial career that late?
Yeah, definitely. I really wasn't a great or interesting player, I think, until the time I was in my 40s. And then I had started to bring everything together, and the years that I had spent just before that in India studying Indian music, they started to come together in my mind, how to use those ideas, those ragas, and mix it with blues. So it probably was a good moment. And lyric-wise, too, somebody once said that when you listen to music, you can hear the musician in the music, and it's true of your lyrics too. They say a lot about you as a person. So I'd done a fair bit of living up until that point, and I think that started to come through in the lyrics. When I was younger, I think my lyrics might be perhaps more hormone driven. and at my age, they just started to sit back and look for wisdom. I think that's what was the change.
Yeah. With the blues, it's unlike, obviously pop or even rock and that, which is, always seen kind of as a young person's game. The blues greats have always not only stayed playing, but gotten better with age. And like the fact that you had your roots in the blues, and I want to also get into, the world music or Indian music side of it, but the fact that your roots were in the blues, did it give you less hesitancy or more confidence about getting into it that late in the game?
Yeah, definitely. Blues is a no-age music, and that's a great thing. It's one of the few styles, perhaps, where you can get away with it. Age is an asset. But, at any rate, I couldn't really play much more than blues. I could feel the blues, I don't know what it is that makes you feel it, but I could feel it and enjoy it, and that was my identity at first, blues musician. And the blues community here in Canada, they were very gracious. They didn't call my music weird or anything like that. They embraced it. They started giving me awards, and I was thinking, oh, well, that's good, because I was afraid they're going to say, too new age, go away. But no, they're really good, and I think the blues community enjoys that someone will breathe some new life into the blues, while paying respect to the tradition. Because you don't want to suddenly turn it on its head and say, this is the new way. But I love the tradition of blues, and I just want to add a little bit to it with the Indian stuff.
What I wanted to get into is how you developed this very unique sound. It's interesting in the sense that it combines blues and it combines Indian music, but in a still familiar way. When you hear it, you almost don't, well, at least when I first heard you, I didn't almost immediately notice the Indian influences till I started getting a few songs in, and I was like, what is that sort of thing? Know what I mean? I know you'd trained for a while with VM Bot. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But first of all, where did that relationship start, and where did that knowledge or just initial love of Indian music come from?
I grew up just outside of, when we came from England, I moved just outside of Toronto as a kid. My father was in the British Navy, and he was always gone, and he was in India a lot, and he started it. He used to send me things from India, carved animals and different things. And I started to think about India, and then when I was a teenager and in the music business, I was enjoying that, but I was still thinking I should go to India one day. And so I went in the late 70s the first time, and I realized it was really something I was really into. I listened to the sitar, and I loved it. So I went back in 86, and I stayed there 12 years. And I first studied sitar in Pune, which is south of Bombay, for many years. And then I didn't think I was going to be able to do much with that sitar somehow, but it was nice to learn the music. Then I heard about V.M. Bhatt, Vishwa Mohan Bhatt. He lived in Rajasthan, and he was playing a slide guitar, playing classical music. And I thought, well, I play slide guitar, and I play a little Indian music. Let's go meet him. And I went up to see him, and he was a really nice guy. He invited me in, and he saw it in my eyes that I was going to stay, whether he wanted or not. So he said, okay, you're here. And he gave me a guitar. Like the next day, he gave me one of his Venas. He said, okay, you're here, stay here, practice. So I stayed there 5 years with him and practiced 5 hours every day. And it was lovely. I started to understand Indian music, started to feel it, started to hear it in my head. And by the time I came back here to start playing for people, I couldn't get that Indian stuff out of my head. So whatever I played had always an Indian flavor to it, and still does to this day.
Very cool. And you mentioned the Veena there, which I believe did Bhatt invent the Veena?
Yes. He didn't invent Indian slide guitar because that was already around for ages. They have a lot of slide instruments, but what he did was he put sympathetic strings on a guitar, and that gave it that sitarish sound. And for that, he's well known, having created that. And he's a master. I sat at his feet for many years. He's deep.
To do what you now do, or have been doing for the last 14, 15 years, which is, like we said, combining the blues with Indian music, and a very, I don't know how to say it, essentially just a very pleasurable way. It combines the two almost effortlessly, which I would think takes a true understanding and mastering of both genres separately. Was that a conscious thing for you or did you say, I'm going to create this new sound that combines these, or did that just start happening naturally once you had mastered both?
Yeah, I loved the blues as a kid, and I played it. And then later on, I studied Indian music. I loved that, but I couldn't figure out if there was any relationship between the two, really. And I was studying with Vishwa. It had been about 2 or 3 years I was with him, and then suddenly he was off to America for a tour. And when he came back some weeks later, he said, I met a guy named Rai Cooder, and we recorded an album together in a monastery in the middle of the night. And I said to him, Rai Cooder, he's a great player. Let me hear it. And he had a copy of the recording. I listened to it, and I think, lights went off in my head. Wow, I love that. I love the blues. I love Indian. And it stayed with me, and I still couldn't find a way to bring them together. But I started to experiment, and I realized that some Indian ragas, some classical pieces of music, had the same notes as some blues scales. So I thought I can mix them together, and if I give the inflections of Indian music, the phrasing, what we call in India the meend, how you approach a note, if I do that to the notes while playing blues, well, that could be really weird. Maybe some people will like it. So it started to come like that. It was all in my head, and then the styles started to get to know each other, and that's still what's going on. They're getting to know each other. Yeah.
Was there any influence there, or even inspiration that it could be done? And it may not be the case, it kind of doesn't sound like it, but for a lot of people, their first introduction to Indian music, or the sitar specifically, is through the Beatles, and particularly George Harrison's compositions, and the relationship with George Harrison. Ravi Shankar is well known and all that, but the fact that the Beatles had brought together Western and Eastern music in a big way and popularized it and made it familiar, did that in any way tell you it can be done and people will like it, or it'll be accepted?
Well, in the late 60s and the 70s, all things Indian were very mystical and enticing to all of us. We went on the hippie trail, they called it, where you went through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, down into India, and I traveled that route too. So India was cool suddenly after the Beatles. But it's interesting to note that the Beatles didn't discover Ravi Shankar by themselves. Actually, David Crosby introduced George.
Oh, really?
Yeah. David Crosby was doing an album in Hollywood with a producer that was also producing Ravi's first record in the early '60s, and he told David about Ravi, and David found out about him, and then he shared that with George, and I think it was within a year, not only a year, that the first sitar appeared on the record. Mm-hmm. While I was living with Vishwa, George came twice with Ravi to visit. Both on those particular days, I had gone to Bombay to get a visa. So I missed him both times. But when I came back, Vishwa told me about George was there. I said, George Harrison? And Vishwa really didn't know who he was. And I said, George Harrison from the Beatles. And Vishwa was looking at me, I think, Beatles, maybe. He had no idea. I said, well, they were a band, and they sold a few records. They did pretty good. And Vishwa said, anyways, I got his phone number. So I said, oh, good, let's call him. So we got on the phone. I got on the phone to England, and we called George. And I always remember, I never got to talk to him. I only got to talk to his wife. And I remember what she said to me. She said, do you know what bloody time it is? And that was it. I didn't get any closer to George than that.
Fair enough to, I guess, move now more back to the present. I said 20 Strings and the Truth is, it was your 13th or 14th album since 14th album since 2001, which, like I said, is crazy in a lot of ways. Is there much unreleased material? Like, to be putting out albums that constantly, are you essentially just putting out everything you write? And are you writing constantly? Or is it every year, like, I'm going to write a new batch of songs now?
Yeah, you know what happens after I finish a record already? One day I'll be noodling and there'll come another song and then another. Once I got 2 or 3, I start thinking about recording a record. And then I have to work towards it. But I don't have any catalog of songs that I've written over the years. I write for a record. And a lot of those ones, you won't hear me play live. I'll write them, record them, and that was it. They came and they went.
Interesting. Yeah. When you say you write for a record, like, I speak to a lot of songwriters, and some of them are more of the kind of let it happen when it happens stance, where you just sort of wait for the inspiration or whatever, and others treat it like a 9-to-5 job in a sense, where every day they make time to write, and sometimes it results in a song, sometimes it doesn't, but they treat it like a job. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
Yes, well, I think that I have a little more intuition than intellect happening in the songwriting process. I don't practice it regularly. Maybe I did around the first album or two, but now I sort of go with the intuition, and I get a sense of even a song. I'll just get a rough map of it, and when I go to the studio, I'll fill in the details. Quite often I'll go in the studio and I'll lay down a rhythm track, and then I'll take it home and I'll write words for it, something like that. So, but I would say that if that works for you, doing something daily, that can't be wrong. That can be great. I did my 5 years, 5 hours a day practice. I understand that you have to work hard at it, no matter how natural it comes to you. It's a good idea to work hard at it. Yeah.
Very cool. And well, to wrap up here, the show tonight, it's the show of the whole festival I was looking forward to most. And is it, this is kind of a selfish question in a way, but as far as what to expect from tonight, is it going to be 3 separate sets with you, John and James, or is it going to be collaborative? How are you guys setting it up?
No, it's 3 separate sets. I have yet to meet those guys. I'm sure I'll get a chance to say hello. But yeah, everybody does their own thing, and I'm looking forward to seeing them. I've seen myself already, so they'll be a real surprise to me. I'm really I feel very blessed that the the Quebec audience has taken to me and my music, and I've been invited back here many times, and it's always a pleasure to come here.
Very cool. So, Harry Manx, if you haven't heard him, check him out. Just to tell the quick anecdote, which I told you before we started, is how I came across Harry a year or two ago, kind of the old-fashioned way. I was in a record store. Your album, West Eats Meat, was playing over the speakers. I didn't know what it was, and then went to the counter, asked the guy, like I said, the old-fashioned way, and he showed me the album, and I bought it on the spot, and I've been following you and being interested in what you're doing ever since then. So I'm excited for the show tonight. Harry, just thanks a lot for making this time, man.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Best to you.